Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Hold My Drink, where we navigate the news and politics with a chaser of civility. I'm your host, Jen, inviting you to grab your favorite beverage, sit back, and imagine with us how to create a new American identity together. Welcome to this week's Hold My Drink and Counterweight podcast with my co host, David Bernstein. Today, we have a returning guest, Angel Eduardo. Angel he's the king of star manning. Angel, I also think that you may be the most rational voice on Twitter. Like you're making, I see you are to me at least. Um, so we have a lot to talk about today, but you know the drill. Before we get started, what did we bring to the table, Angel? Are you drinking out of your Superman cup again?
No, no. This time, just drinking some water out of a thermos.
You're disappointed without the Superman cup.
Yeah, no.
That's your thing.
I'm actually not at home, so
Oh,
I don't have all my Superman accoutrement.
accoutrement. Yes.
No, but I'm saving my calories for dinner in a little bit.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm starting already. David, what about you?
I am afraid I'm going to have to disappoint. I did not have time between Zooms to pour myself a drink.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
All right. Well, then I'm going to be the one. I'm very excited about this. It's called Ranch Water Hard Seltzer, and you can see it's got a bull on it, like the bull's in my background, and it's spicy. It's natural lime juice and jalapeno flavor. So look,
ooh, wow, sounds
I'm,
awesome.
I'm like actually going to like. Okay, not that spicy, but whatever. That's that's what we're going with today. Um, okay, so we have with Angel, you know, the conversation started. He posted something as per usual, which was brilliant, and he said, "But I don't believe in it's not color blind, it's color blah." And I want to know what color blah is because I love that. I love that. You know, let me just back up a minute before I let you go. You know, I hear the different conversations around color blindness. I mean, honestly, I think it's kind of silly, and I think we get wrapped up in semantics. I mean, obviously, no one is colorblind, right? I mean, we're not colorblind, but the idea behind being colorblind is that we see people based on their characteristics and not these immutable traits. So, what is wrong with color blindness, and where should we be color blah?
Well, it really is a semantic problem. I don't think that there's anything wrong with the term colorblind, because I think that at least up until recently, um, the appropriate amount of slack was given to a metaphorical concept that's meant to illustrate an idea or an ideal, and it worked just fine. Everybody understood what everybody else meant by colorblind. Nobody thought, as far as I know. I mean, I was a kid when I first heard it, and I never thought this. Nobody thought that colorblind means race blind or racism blind, right? It doesn't mean you don't see things. It doesn't mean you can't tell, hey, this guy is African American. It doesn't mean that you don't see, hey, this particular group of people deal with these particular problems, or are in these particular circumstances as a result of racism or things like that. Whatever other kind of prejudice there is. It never meant that, and people understood that it didn't mean that, and it was meant to illustrate, the Martin Luther King ideal of judging someone by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. That was the whole point of it, right? But as happens, the semantics start to get prickly because people start to pull back a lot of that slack. They won't give people that slack, or there are people who are hiding behind the colorblind label and becoming racism blind, or using it as a way to say, no, where everything is fine, I don't see color, I have no problems with being racist, I have no racist tendencies, even if they do. So it's just, people start lying, and then other people start lying in response, and a perfectly good term like colorblind becomes useless. And I see it a lot on Twitter. I see it, people arguing on and on about the people who want colorblind just want to ignore racism, and that's of course not what most people want to do at all. It's what they were taught when they were kids. When I was a kid, I was taught, hey, colorblindness is something to aspire to. It's the Martin Luther King dream of, race not mattering, race being as inconsequential to your judgment of people and to our treatment of people as hair color or eye color, right? It's just, it's obviously you see it, you can tell, hey, I'm not exactly the same as you, but that's not going to factor into the way I treat you. That's not going to factor into the way I talk about you or interact with you. So, I mean, it's a total joke, right? But I just came up with, well, maybe, colorblind is too incendiary now. We've got to, we've got to nix it because too many people are either intentionally or not misinterpreting it. So we need some other way of articulating the point, which is we obviously see race and we see racism, right? Or at least we see what we call race, right? Because I'm of the opinion that race is nonsense and that we really just need to stop, kind of reifying it. But so we need something else. So I just thought, well, what if we just call it color blah, right? Like obviously we see it, but we're just kind of like blah about it. We don't care. It's inconsequential. Like I don't care what T-shirt you're wearing. That's not going to change how I feel about you. And I don't care what color your skin is. That's not going to change how I feel about you. It's blah. It's, you know, me noticing that you have more melanin than me or less melanin than me doesn't move me any further towards getting to know you, figuring out whether I like you. It doesn't do any of that. It's just blah. So, so I just proposed that on Twitter, and a few people saw it. They thought it was funny, I guess. I haven't written an essay on it or anything like that. It's just something that I, off the cuff sort of thing. And some people like it. You like it.
I loved it.
So that's what it
Ask
is,
about.
basically.
Can I ask a little bit? I love it too, by the way. I think it's great. And I was listening to Yashka Monk interview Camille Foster on his podcast the other day, and I just pulled up the transcript really quickly because I thought he captured a different version of sort of the colorblind aspiration. And this is how he described it. Humans are deeply tribal creatures. And so questions like race or religion deeply structure society and likely will for a long time. But the project of institutions is to push back against that, to allow us to have solidarity with each other, to allow us to maintain a complicated project like the United States of America that is a multi-ethnic, multiracial democracy. And so, yes, we need to recognize these groups and the fact that they will never go away, but we need our institutions to some extent to push back against them precisely so we don't end up with a society that's deeply tribal. In other words, what he's arguing is that this is not just the ideal of colorblindness is has an institutional purpose in a way. It's to make sure that institutions play that sort of leveling role, and that we should still aspire to that. We don't want our institutions to give way to the same kind of tribalism that we practice in our cultural life. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I listened to that podcast too. Camille is, I mean, I love Camille. He's awesome, and I really agree. He he actually talked about it, and he said something to the effect of,
Hmm.
he didn't even really like the term colorblind because it
Hmm.
kind of suggests an impairment. It suggests an inability to see something that is there.
Right.
When the whole point of the metaphor is aspirational, as you said, that it's meant to transcend something. So I guess color blah works a little bit better in
Yeah.
that sense.
He,
It's
he's a ra-
very.
he's a he's a radical individualist. I'm actually looking at that transcript.
Mhm.
It's an aspiration toward a world where we are regarding race in precisely the same sort of way that we regard height or hair color, because you can change your eye color or hair color with some assistance, and no one comes to think, oh no, now you've totally become a different person. You're blue. You're blue today.
Right.
So he actually doesn't like that version that Yashka Monk outlined that I just said down. That's not his. I mean, he's okay with it, but it's not his main preference. His main preference is to go beyond that in an aspirational way,
Hmm.
say we should just try to make it completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, I'm more and more agreeing with him. I just finished reading Racecraft by Barbara and Karen Fields.
Mhm.
And, the idea there is that race is a nonsense concept, as I mentioned earlier, and it's a fiction that we perpetuate. Even those of us who are not racist perpetuate it by kind of, accepting the premises, accepting, racism is a real thing, right? So race is a fiction, racism is a reality, right? But it's based on a fiction. And we kind of work backwards from racism to creating race and making race a real thing when it's nonsense. And we really need to, think about how we talk about these things and how we can address racism without reifying race, right? And the analogy that I always draw is, I don't believe in God, right? um, but I recognize that people believe in God, and that belief in God has affected the world that I live in, right? The world that I live in would be completely different if people didn't believe in God before, right? And if people didn't believe in God right now, the world would be very different. So I recognize the effect of that belief on the world and on my life and the way that I speak, and, the metaphors that we use and the historical um, events that we point to as points of commonality, things like that, right? Like we kind of have biblical references and all that sort of stuff, right? So that stuff is all real, but I don't think God is real, and I don't think I need to accept God as being real in order to deal with the world that belief in God has created, right? So, you know it I think it's analogous because I don't need to accept race. I don't need to accept this label of I'm brown, or you're black, or you're white, because these labels are nonsense. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to pretend racism doesn't exist. I'm going to pretend that other people don't believe it and act upon it, right? Those things are separate, and I can do that, right? I think we can figure out a way to have these conversations. It's difficult because it's so ingrained in our brains. We just can't help but say, like, I'm a white guy, I'm a black guy, or whatever. And then we conflate those labels with culture and with, community and all that sort of stuff. And I think we need to figure out a way to communicate to people that none of the things that they truly value would be lost by abandoning this nonsense concept of race. All the community, all the camaraderie, all the history, all the beauty, all the connection would still remain, because you're still a community, you're still a people, you're still uh, you still have a history, a shared history. It still matters. None of that would get erased. The only thing that gets erased is the harmful and disgusting and ridiculous idea that was used to oppress people. So I mean, it was created and used to oppress people. It was for no other purpose. So we can get rid of that. We don't need it. I'm confident that we're smart enough to be able to do that. We can do that balancing act, right? We can strip the negativity out of these things and keep all the things that matter. All the music and culture and beauty. All that stuff is great. I love it. I wouldn't want to get rid of it. We just don't have to be. We don't have to internalize this idea of, like, yes, I'm black, I'm brown, you're white. Like, we don't need that. So Camille is very much on this level as well. I think he's very anti-race, and more I'm getting there. I'm just I don't want to deal with any of that. I'm opting out.
You can retire from race, like Thomas Chatterton Williams has.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like Thomas Chatterton Williams,
Hmm.
that doesn't mean you don't see racism and you
Right.
don't understand it exists and you don't care, right? You totally do. I totally do. But I just don't have to play ball. Like, I don't have to,
Mm.
it's like, Sam Harris used this in a different context once, but he was talking about, like, you know, atheism shouldn't be considered a belief, and that the idea that it's considered a belief kind of lends it to being criticized the same way that beliefs are criticized. And it's kind of like there's this chalk outline of an atheist, and we're just kind of crawling into it. It's kind of the same thing. It's like there's this chalk outline of a race, and we're just crawling into it and just allowing it to overtake everything, and we don't have to.
Mm.
So let me ask you, with color blah, this is how I see it. This is how I understand it. Let me
Mm.
repeat what I heard so you can. So I mean, I've got green eyes, I've got red hair, I've got white skin. It wouldn't be that you would say I'm not, you would change any of those, but it would just be one other thing, like your hair color, like your eye color. So I mean, I'm
Right.
thinking about going to a driver's, getting going and getting a driver's license. I mean, they ask about eye color, they ask about whatnot. I think that it just becomes. I mean, would you suggest eliminate it altogether where there's no, I'm brown, I'm black, I'm white, or that it just becomes a category like my eyes are green, my hair is red, where in that do you see color blah?
Hmm.
Because
Um,
I don't think like my eyes are green doesn't isn't involved with like race. I mean, I think that our skin colors are beautiful. And again, it's not that we don't see it, it's just that it doesn't matter.
right.
But
It,
when
well,
we're trying to identify each other, oh, I
right. Right.
would
Right.
we just say, I mean, I don't know what color he is, how would you address that?
I haven't thought about that, but so here's the problem, right? Um, my mom is 100% Dominican, from the Dominican Republic, born there, raised there. Her skin she's about as fair as you are, right? So, um, I mean, that will help you describe her, right? Like if I'm writing a scene and I'm talking about my mother and I'll say, she's got a, feathered black hair and, pale skin, right? And brown eyes, like that will help you create an image. And if that's the point, if that's what you need, then you would use those descriptors, right? But saying a white person is different. Saying a black person is different. There's a whole lot that's being smuggled in underneath there. So, on a driver's license, yeah, I guess if for identification purposes, it'd say like hair red, eyes green, skin pale, or skin, fair, or whatever, however we want to decide to label
Mhm,
the
mhm,
palette there, right? But
mhm.
but that doesn't really tell me anything about you as a person,
Right.
right? It just allows me to identify you, right? If you're in a crowd and I read your description, I can say, "Oh, it's that one. I know it's this person because I've got these
Mm.
details," right? Unless you're in, you know, uh, some convention of redheads.
Well, I mean, but that's kind of the problem, though. It's so funny. We've gotten so sensitive around race. Like, it literally, if I'm telling someone, "Hey, go and meet this person," they're gonna be wearing a blue shirt, blue jeans. If I sometimes I feel like I don't want to say they're black because then I'm identifying them as black or brown. It's like, but I'm not. In my mind, I'm like, I'm trying to give you so that you can recognize this person.
Right.
He's wearing this. He's got black hair. He's wearing a cap. Black skin, whatever. And we've gotten so sometimes I'm like, I don't want to even say that because it's like, well, did you think that I was judging him on based on the color of skin? No, I'm just trying to give you a description,
Yeah.
So
It's funny. I had an idea for like a comedy sketch, and it was these two kids playing Guess Who. These two white kids playing Guess Who,
Mm.
and one kid is about to win. There's just one more person that they need to guess on the other person's board or whatever it is. Um, and they're trying to figure out, the way you play that game is like, are they wearing a hat? Are they
right,
bald? Whatever it
right.
is. And the other kid's last, tile to flip is a, black person. Um, and the other kid is trying to figure out every possible thing he can say besides is he black, because
Mhm.
he's terrified, right? He's just like sweating and it's super intense and they'll play intense music and it's the same basic thing. And I've been in that situation, right, where someone is like, hey, can you hand this to my friend John over there? And I go, who is John? And I'm looking and there's 13 people in the proximity. And like, oh, it's the guy with the blue shirt, but there's four guys with blue shirts. It's the guy with the long hair. There's three guys with long hair. And I'm like, you mean the black guy? Just say the black guy. You know, like I wouldn't say that now because I'm trying to actively force myself out of using those categories, right?
Mm.
Whenever I write them, because I just to be clear, if I'm talking about something, I use scare quotes now, because I really just want to at least take a step back from reifying these things, right? But yeah, at the time it's like, look, just say the Jamaican dude, just say the dude with dreadlocks,
Mhm.
whatever it is, because what you're trying to do is point somebody out. But I mean, as we know, with you know, whatever they call it when the police put in like a description of a suspect or whatever, the suspect is African American, approximately 6'5", whatever, the wrong person gets picked up a lot, right? The wrong person
Right.
gets stopped a lot. So clearly it's not very good at doing the thing that it's ostensibly meant to be doing. So I'm sure we could figure out something better anyway.
Well, you bring up something really, really interesting. Sorry, David, to
No,
dominate
keep on
this, but
going.
this is really fascinating to me. See, my husband's in law enforcement, and we have this discussion quite a lot because in where he works, they have stopped using race as a category, and they use it still within internally because they've got to find the right person. And again, to me, it's not race. It's like it's anything like skin color is same as eye
Mhm.
colors, hair color, whatever. But
Yeah.
they won't publish that out to the public because they don't want to generate stereotypes and whatnot, which I completely understand.
Sure.
And yet, if the public is out looking for, like you just said, the guy in the blue shirt, I mean, is
Right.
I mean, it could be, who knows? And so I think when you talk about reifying race, we've done that. Like, it should not be a thing where if we say green eyes, black skin, white skin, red hair, we've done that. And I don't know how to get away from that because I think that those are important descriptors,
Hmm.
like we've just noted, for saying, hey, and how do we get past the point where we can just go, hey, my friend over there with the black skin, and that's just normal. Like, say my friend over there with the blue eyes. Like, how do we do that?
There's a lot of work to do before we can get there with any kind of, quote unquote safety, right? Because there's too many implications. There's too many tensions. There's too many conversations people haven't had. There are too many topics that people are really uncomfortable with for that to be as kind of whatever, as blah as it should be, right? So that's part of the thing is, color blah is just as aspirational. We're not there yet, right? Because people obviously do care
Right, right.
and people are obviously not blah, but we want to get there. We want to get to blah. And the reason that I even, came up with that silly thing was just to alleviate the problem of, how overburdened the term colorblind has become. It's now it's a cudgel. It's a political kind of
Hmm.
weapon.
It
It's
is.
used by one group in one way, it's used by another group in another way, and people just talk past each other. The term is useless now because everyone's walking around with their own version of it. Oh, when people say this, this is
Hmm.
what they mean, and I'm going to respond as though this is what they mean, even if they don't. Even if in
Hmm.
reality that's not what they mean at all. And I think most people still mean what it was supposed to mean when they say that, but it's just too easy to completely mischaracterize it and then, run a mile with that mischaracterization before anybody can pull the brakes and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Um, so that's the problem is we still have to get to this point, right? Like I can do it myself, um, just because, whatever it is, my temperament, the way my brain works, when I was taught about Martin Luther King as a kid, it just clicked in my head. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds perfectly good. That sounds reasonable. Yeah, okay. So treating people a certain way based on these things is ridiculous. We shouldn't do that. Okay. And that was sort of it, Uh, in my brain, that was it. And maybe it's easier or it was easier for me because, as I mentioned, like my mom is very fair. My father looks much more like me. We have the same sort of complexion, the dark features and things. And I have cousins who kind of look, you know, um, East Asian, right? Like they just kind of have a sort of East Asian vibe. Like I've met Chinese girls who look just like a cousin of mine. They look very, very similar, which is odd. But my cousin is 100% Dominican. So it just shows that, these categories are amorphous and
Hmm.
especially the racial ones are completely ridiculous. And, when it comes to something like the Dominican Republic, where, you know, I think it's 90% of people from the Dominican Republic have direct African ancestry, right? Because of the obvious reason, slavery. And then, I did my genetic profile thing, the ancestry.com thing, and it's, Dominican Republic. And then it just immediately jumps straight to, Spain and Portugal and, you know, East Africa, West Africa, all that stuff. It's a mix of all these things. So it's just, that's part of it too, is just that these categories are completely inaccurate, right? And
Hmm.
it's it will be difficult because we've kind of built so much upon these categories
Yeah.
that it's going to feel kind of like pulling the bottom Jenga piece out, right? It's gonna kind of be, people are worried the whole structure is gonna collapse. I don't think it will. I think that we can do it, but we have to make a conscious effort to do it, and it's difficult.
Mm. Yeah. I did my 23andMe and I am 50.3% Asian, West Asian. My mom happens to be from Baghdad, Iraq. And it's very
Wow.
funny. I'm married to an East Asian woman, and I have Asian stepkids, and I always like to tell them I'm Asian, I'm Asian American, and they just start laughing and denying my ethnic claims. But it also just tells you how vacuous these things tend to be. Can I switch gears? I'm the ADD person here. I'm always the one to sort of like pivot. My so a couple weeks ago we had a Hold My Drink podcast with Charles Love, and it was funny and delightful.
Oh,
And
Charles.
I got into a nice argument with Charles in which I was the person arguing that I think that there is systemic racism in certain institutions, and he was denying that it exists at all in modern America. Um,
Right.
and I was happy to have the conversation because the discourse tends to be either systemic racism is ubiquitous and defines American life in every single way,
Yeah.
or another camp says it doesn't exist at all. And I'm trying to sort of get to the bottom of it. And by the bottom of it, I don't mean that I'll come up with the answer of how much systemic racism exists, but to help create a discourse that allows us to actually engage in inquiry over the topic of where it exists, if at all, and what it means to say that there's systemic racism in an institution, and how do we know it, or how might we suspect it even where it exists. And I'm wondering where you come down on that. I don't think we talked about that in our previous podcast.
No, I don't think so. And I'm not sure. I think my tendency is always to say, okay, well, it's probably a little bit of both, right? Charles is probably right in the sense that it's not everywhere. It's not, you know, it's not this, kind of rotted core to our society. He's probably right there. I don't think every bit of our system is deeply infused with racism, right? And it also depends
That's,
on.
by the way, for the record, that's my stance. Charles is saying it doesn't exist at all. I say
Right,
that it's not, America is not systemically racist, but there is systemic racism in America. That's what my
right.
argument is.
Yeah, yeah. And I probably fall in line with where you are generally. And it depends on what the definition is there, because that's the other thing, is we can define that however we want. It's there are definitions running around where if there is any disparity between these racial groups, that is evidence of systemic racism. That's how we're going to define it. The definition is we don't have perfect parity in whatever topic or field we're looking at, and so there it is, right there. I mean, what could the answer be besides that, right? And then it turns into this kind of accusatory sort of question where it's like, what are you saying the explanation is? It must be racism, otherwise you're saying one group is inferior, or whatever, and it starts to get crazy. But I
Exactly.
mean, I think uh, slavery was pretty systematic, right? And there are going to be ripple effects to that, even after slavery ends, right? And you have Jim Crow and redlining; those were pretty systematic, right? And then I mean, systems are what are systems? They're apparatus that we operate as people, right? People are operating them. If people operating systems are racist, the systems will probably, there will probably be some racism coming out the other side, right? And then it's possible when a system is very large and multifaceted and complex that even after those racist people are replaced by people who are not racist, the system is still churning out racist stuff on the other side because systems take a long time to kind of correct themselves. It's the Barack Obama metaphor of the ocean liner, right? We can't make a hard 90-degree turn, right? It's a slow progression to make a turn.
What is that? Can you think of an example of where, and I agree completely with what you said. Of course, I think
Mm.
that there can be ripple effects, but can you think of an example of where an institution was intentionally racist at some point,
Mhm.
and ceased to be intentionally so, but still is churning out racist outcomes? Can you think of a specific way
Uh,
that that manifests itself?
I'm not super educated on this, but my understanding from what I've read and heard people discussing this stuff is, just where certain groups of people live
Right,
is
the
the
redlining phenomenon.
yeah, it's a direct result of where they could live before. And whether those communities, those areas, those districts are underserved and underprivileged, it's probably the result of, policies that kind of, you know, um, intentionally left these people out, or they're trying to kind of squeeze them, right? So the fact that we still have communities that are poor is probably the result of that, at least to some degree, right? Maybe not 100%, but there, I mean, there's just no way that something that big and that systematic is not going to still have ripple effects that we have to deal with, right? Because we haven't corrected everything. So yeah, I mean, I'm no scholar. I'm not an expert on any of this stuff. It's just my, reasoning by myself with myself. But um, yeah, I have no trouble believing that there are going to be after effects, and it doesn't necessarily mean that anybody's racist now, though of course people are. Um, but I think that even though we think we have a fair system, right? That we kind of talked about this part of it last time. It's like we think we have a meritocracy, right? We think, no, look, hey, anyone who passes the finish line gets the medal, and that's fair. So we're cool. We fixed it. Everything is fair. But you have to take into account, like, not everyone is starting at the same place, and not everyone's got running shoes and all that sort of stuff. So I think those things are. I mean, why don't they have them? Why don't they have running shoes? There's a there's a chain of prior causes there that we have to look at, and I'm sure racism is part of it. So that's my haphazard sort of musing out loud answer to you. But I'm definitely not an expert, so I could be totally wrong about it.
And it's interesting, the idea about that redlining would create sort of fixed patterns of residency and the like. I still don't think that that's above scrutiny. Like, you could say, at what point do people then regain agency who live in those communities and have the ability to move or improve their lives? Again, I'm not trying to blame people who have been victimized, as they clearly have, or certainly their parents or grandparents were victimized, but
Mhm.
it doesn't answer all questions there are that there are. And I guess it's important in a sense that we're able to talk about these things so we solve the right problem. And I worry that the discourse on systemic racism and critical race theory and the like pushes us away from solving the right problem. And maybe you could say, listen, we'll agree to disagree. I shouldn't need to agree with you that systemic racism is the controlling factor here, or the primary factor here, in order to say, I don't want there to be major disparities in our criminal justice system. I
Yeah,
don't want there to be major disparities in poverty.
yeah,
Whether or not there are cultural factors along with systemic racism, or there's neither of those. It doesn't really matter. What we need to do is fashion solutions that are best able to narrow these disparities. And I fear that's where our discourse has gone off track. We're not even able to do that. People want you to sort of, they want to subject you to a ideological litmus test before you even join the coalition. And I think
yeah.
that's what gotten us off track. What's your sense of that?
Yeah, I think that this is the dogmatism that I worry about. Right? It's like, well, do you care that I agree with you 100%? Is that what you want? What you want is for me to agree with you 100%, or do you care that we both want to solve this problem? Right? Because as long as Charles wants to solve the same problems that I want to solve, I'm cool. I don't agree with Charles 100%,
Mm-hmm.
but as long as, if, I know in my heart, I've talked to him, he's a great guy, right? I don't agree with him 100%, but who do I agree with 100%? Not even myself, right?
Right, right,
So,
right.
so but he's a great guy. I like him a lot. I've had a great time on his podcast, and we don't see eye to eye on everything, but I know that he cares about people, and
Mhm.
that if he saw someone suffering, he would want to do something to help, right? And it's just a matter of details there, right? So now we're back to the star manning thing, but I worry that people get lost in their fight for whatever cause that they're fighting for, that they're passionate about. Their passion is great, and their motivation is great, and their feeling of we need to do this is great, but it becomes a problem when the tenets become more important than the intentions, right?
Right.
Because
But
it's like, no,
what
you
if that's the purpose, though, Angel?
right.
Like, okay, let me go back to. So I was very involved in my last job in criminal justice reform, and at one point I went to visit a local community and to talk to a coalition that was doing criminal justice reform, and I sort of put it out there that do I really need to agree with you that white supremacy is causing this criminal justice problem in order to engage effectively in a coalition? And I have to tell you, the answer was yes, that you do. Like from a lot of the activists, like they were very clear that
According to them, you mean?
according to them, right. In other
Mhm.
words, for me to actually do the work that I would want to do, I'd have to do it on my own or find new coalition partners who
Yeah.
agreed with me or agreed that it didn't make a difference whether we agreed. And what I started to realize from a lot of the people that I encountered in this discourse is they were less concerned with the problem to be solved with sort of changing the terms of discourse, period. And some of them really wanted to sort of shatter white supremacy as a sort of social matrix. And that was an ideological aspiration, not a social policy aspiration.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, as you're talking, I'm just imagine a homeless shelter or a soup kitchen that's run by a Catholic church that only admits Catholics. We would immediately recoil at that. And I mean, it would be ridiculous for the church to do it, right? If you have people knocking on your door saying, "Hey, I'd like to help," they would ask, "Are you Catholic?" You're like, "No, I'm Jewish," or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, you can't be a helper. You can't be one of the people serving soup, or worse than that, you can't be one of the people getting soup from this soup kitchen because you don't believe the things that I believe." That's crazy, and they don't
Right.
do that, right? They'll take any volunteer
Hmm.
because what they want, at least in that moment, is to do the thing. They want to help people who are hungry. Hey, these people are hungry. It's our mission to help these people. Let's do it. You're an atheist, but you want to help? Great. I don't care. Right? I mean, that should be the attitude. And yeah, it becomes worrisome to me when the question is, do you hold these tenets? Do you believe these truths about the world? Can you parrot these talking points? And if not, we are not allies. If not, we don't have the same goal. I think that's a delusion. I think that's dogmatism. If what you really care about is helping the disenfranchised, it shouldn't really matter as long as somebody is willing to help along with you. Uh, you know, yeah. I mean, that just seems self defeating, right? And it seems self defeating from the standpoint of wanting to solve the problem, right? And it seems it's worrisome to me from the standpoint of, oh, what I'm realizing is that you don't actually necessarily care about solving the problem, or at the very least, the solving the problem part is kind of ancillary to your group membership and sense of community and sense of purpose, and you just want conformity in that sense, so that, like, for your own comfort, or your ideological kind of stasis. But those are contradictory aims a lot of times. You can't. Nobody has perfect allies, right? The whole point of it is we are imperfect allies. We are not going to be totally in lockstep with each other all the time. But as long as we hold these values, as long as we have this goal, we can work together to an extent, right? I mean, it's like the whole political system. The whole point of the political system is, hey, you're much more conservative than I am, right? I'm much more liberal than you are. we're on the opposite sides of this spectrum, but ideally speaking, but we care about America and we want to move America forward. So let's argue it out and hash it out and find some compromise that moves us. You know, maybe it would have moved us 10 feet, but because we had to compromise, we moved 5. But 5 is better than 0. So I don't know. I think
Mhm.
it betrays a kind of, primacy of ideology over the mission itself.
Mhm.
Mm,
And that frightens me because ideology, I mean, dogmatism is not good. So,
mm.
Or over people itself, dogma over people. And
right.
um
Yeah.
but so I've got a question. I want to go back to you were talking about how we've been reifying race.
Yeah.
And my question is, I mean, we've reified race since our history. We knew
Yeah,
that's
sure.
why we've got racism. But
Hmm.
do you feel like there has been a new push to reify race, let's say in the past, I don't know, 5 to 10 years? I mean, to me, race seems to be all we talk about these days. I mean, we're talking about it now. I don't feel like, part of me feels that this is an important discussion because I think that we need something to push us forward. I think maybe we're at an impasse, or we'd stalled out. At the same time, I think that we've almost like overcorrected, where this we see race everywhere. And in some ways, so you were talking at the very beginning about how, let's just say color as an identifier and not as race, but we've started to talk about race with everywhere. Everything is about race. So,
Mm.
and I don't know that. And I'll finish with this by saying I don't know that what we've done lately to again or reify race, if that's even a word,
Right.
has created that equal starting line that we all so desperately want.
Yeah.
I think in some ways the reification of race has almost brought us back to a point where now we do see color everywhere. We are not color blah nor color blind. We are
Yeah.
color obsessed.
Oh yeah, we are absolutely obsessed with race. We see it everywhere. We conjure it up everywhere like a phantom, and it's not good for us. It's awful. And I think to myself, for example, um an old woman, she's retired and she wants to do something good in the world, and she goes and decides to volunteer in Nigeria or something with Nigerian school children, and there's a photograph of her hugging these school children, and because she loves them and she has a relationship with them now and they love her, and there's this beautiful photograph. And when I see this photograph, I think to myself, wow, that's so beautiful. Look at this, look at this image of people helping people. This is a beautiful thing, right? There are people in need, and there's someone who had the means and decided to give their time and energy to doing that when there was literally no obligation to do so. That's beautiful. Other people look at that and they go, "Oh my God, another white savior,
Mhm,
coming down
mhm.
and doing, like just infusing it with all this cynicism and all this kind of negativity." And it's because of this whole thing, right? It's because of this whole, people literally watch a Superman movie and they're like, "This is just a white savior movie," and I'm like, dude, it makes me so sad that you can watch something that is meant to uplift, um, and all you can see is division, right? It's a tunnel vision that I fell prey to a little bit. I wrote a piece about this and I fell prey to it just because it was all around me during my graduate school experience. It was constant, just roiling. Every syllabus we got was like, well, how many people of color, how many women, and I, you know, not that I don't care about that stuff, but it's just not as interesting to me as, is this a good book? Can I learn something from it? Right? Like
Mm.
I went to grad school for writing, right? So I'm here to learn the craft. I'm here to get something out of it. So, if it's Juno Diaz or, you know, Roxane Gay or whatever, great. But I just want to learn something. That's my primary occupation. But everyone else is it's social justice first. It must be about this stuff all the time, and it's exhausting. I honestly don't know how they have the energy. Well, no, they always say they're exhausted.
You're right.
So it makes
Right.
sense. It makes sense. It is exhausting, but it's just you know you start to see it even when it's not there, and you
Mhm.
start to make it important even when it isn't, right?
Mhm.
And the whole point of everything is to move away from that. That was the whole point of the civil rights movement, and everything was like, hey, we're not being given a seat at the table. Give us a seat at the table. That was the point. And once we get the seat at the table, then it's like, well, stop looking at me like that. I'm just a person like you at the table, right? But for some reason, we just want to keep at it. And that's not to say all the problems have been solved or anything like that, right? I can hear people misinterpreting what I'm saying.
Right.
um, it doesn't mean all the problems are solved. They absolutely are not. It doesn't mean racism is gone. It absolutely is still here. um, it's in my family. I mean, people are racist. It's but it's we need to be careful not to kind of manifest it when it wasn't there before, right? If there was a beautiful video that was being shared a little while ago of these two kids, and they're friends. I think they're classmates, and they're really young. And one of them is white, one of them is black, and they're like, "Oh, we're twins. We have the same eyebrows." Right? I don't know if you saw this video. It's
Yeah.
it's it's beautiful, right? Because they don't see the nonsense that
Right.
we just create this thing around, right? They don't see it. They just say, "Hey, that's my friend. I love my friend. We're the same," right? And we should be excited, and we should be encouraging that, not not laughing at it cynically, right? Like, and there's a scene in the book Racecraft that I mentioned, um, where there's an anecdote where someone was two adults are talking, and they mention a person who is black, and the kid goes, "Oh, they're not black, they're brown," because in their head they're not thinking about race. They're thinking, "Oh, that's an inaccurate description of
Right.
this person. Like, that's not a black crayon, that's a brown crayon." Because I'm talking about the color of their skin, like it's a descriptor, like we were talking about.
Mhm.
And the adults kind of laugh, like, "Oh, look at the naive kids, like they don't know." When really it should be, these naive adults are just reinfusing these nonsense concepts with more importance. They're heightening this stuff. They're validating it by accepting it and internalizing it and seeing the world that way. We should be actively trying to see the world a better way. The whole point is that I just wrote a piece, an opinion piece for Newsweek. I'm talking about all the times that I've been accused of being white, right? And it's meant as a pejorative, right? It's meant as,
Right.
you're not being sufficiently or accurately of color. If you listen to this music, when I was a kid, it was, if you listen to this music, if you dress this way, if you talk this way, if you read books. I got it all the time, right? And now it's like, if you don't vote this way, if you don't agree with the 1619 project, it's all this stuff. You're not black. You're not of color, right? And I call it the one thought rule.
Mhm.
It's a single idea. If you hold a single idea that is not part of the orthodoxy of whatever ideological group or racial group, your very being is called into question, right?
Mm.
And I mean, that's fucking insanity, right? Like, that's crazy. So Charles Love is not black because he holds conservative ideas, right? Larry
Mhm.
Elder, they just wrote in the LA Times, he is the black
Yes.
face of white supremacy
Right. Right.
Yeah,
because he
really
holds
ugly.
the wrong ideas. That's disgusting, right? And it's so dehumanizing, and it's so minimizing, and it's so essentializing, right? It's like, no, you must think this way because you have this skin, right? Or this ancestry. You must have
Mhm.
this opinion, or else you are not. We're going to, we're going to take your card away, right? That's crazy. I kind of got lost there, but yeah, it's
No, no, you said so much. I mean, it's I've never thought so much in the past, let's say again 5 years, maybe max decade. I have friends from all over, and I'm like, it's not that I'm scared to talk to them, but I'm like, I'm always questioning, did I say that right? Is that a
Right.
microaggression? And I have to tell you, here's how it's affected me is as a woman, now I like reinterpret everything a man says to me. Well, was that sexist? What did
Right.
he like? You know, you get back to I'm exhausted. Like I never thought like this before.
Mm.
Maybe I didn't care. Maybe I just never let anything that was a slight, I just let it roll off me. I don't. I was thinking about that today. Like, what did I see slights before and I just didn't care and I let it roll off me? Or am I seeing more slights now because I'm paying more attention? Or is this all just freaking nonsense to begin with? I mean, it's affected every
Yeah.
conversation I have.
Yeah. I mean, what is it? The hammer and the nail, right? When all you have is a hammer, every problem is a nail.
Hmm.
It's that sort of thing. I mean, I don't know if we talked about this, but I've mentioned this before that part of the way, part of the reason I'm the way that I am is because I've been wrong so many times. 100% of the time that I have decided, you know what? I'm tired of this. I'm standing up for myself. I'm telling this asshole off for whatever they said to me or whatever they did in that moment. That slight that I picked up, and I'm like, I'm not going to ignore it this time. I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm going to tell this asshole off. Every single time, 100% of the time that I have done that, I have been wrong. I misunderstood. I misheard. I projected. Something was going on that affected my perception of things, that made it where once I let it out of my mouth, once I let my anger out, once I yelled at this person, or once I, insulted this person, or defended myself against something they didn't say, and they responded like explaining something or going, "What are you talking about?" And then revealing to me what I had misunderstood or missed, I felt awful every single time, and I still feel awful about every single one of those things. I just carry that with me, and it's horrible, right? And I feel so guilty that I made someone feel bad, and I said terrible things to them, and I was wrong to do it. So now I have this kind of reflex to just go, okay, hold on, perceived slight, but how many other ways could this be explained? How many ways could I be misunderstanding? And the thing is, there are always going to be more ways to misunderstand something than to understand it, right?
Mm.
There's only
Mm.
one way to get it right, and there are a billion ways you can get it wrong. So maybe pause. Maybe think to yourself, okay, am I just obsessed with seeing sexism everywhere? Am I just
Mhm.
obsessed with seeing racism everywhere? Or is this an actual instance of racism? And that's difficult to kind of figure out. That's difficult to pinpoint. But that's why you ask questions, right? That's why you follow up. That's why you go, well, hold on, what did you mean by that? And not with hostility, but with genuine curiosity. Like, I'm trying to understand this because there's a miscommunication here. So let me figure this out. And then you might get to the bottom of it and go, okay, yeah, you were being an asshole or you were being racist. In which case you go, all right, well, I don't want to talk to you anymore. But
Mhm.
it's way better to go about it that way than to engage in what will almost certainly be most of the time misfires,
Mm.
because now you're making enemies when you didn't need to, or burning bridges when you didn't need to. You're kind of feeding your own kind of sense of hostility and rancor when it wasn't necessary, and it's just not good for you. It's not good for you. It's not good for anybody.
Yeah. There's a trick that we learned in consulting class called the Ladder of Inference, and it
Mm,
talks about how people start with certain observations and selected data, and then they attribute meaning to what they've heard, and then they've made assumptions about the person's intent, and then they've drawn conclusions, and they start to take actions that are probably based not on the person's actual intent or but on their own inferences from that, from what they said or how they acted. And it happens literally all the time, and if we
yeah.
understand that of ourselves and know that we're so susceptible to it, it's a lot easier to try to catch ourselves when we're doing it,
Hmm.
and to point out when other people are doing it, at least in an organization. And um, but anyway, I'm going to pivot again. Is it okay, Jen?
Yeah, go for
um,
it.
yeah, so we have this, we've been involved in a interesting controversy or tension. Um, there's a letter that all three of us signed that Jennifer and I were involved in creating. It's a letter about the anniversary of the "I Have the Dream" speech. It's a strongly worded letter. It's a letter that says that there are people who are trying to undo the powerful legacy of the "I Have the Dream" speech, and it calls them out on it and makes the claim that we should go back to the original purpose of the "I Have the Dream" speech, the original vision of a colorblind society. That created some backlash among friends, by the way, among groups that we often agree with. And we're going to be talking about some of that backlash. You're going to be one of the featured speakers this coming Saturday about it. And you know, when we first started dealing with this, we thought, oh my God, this is just terrible. And then we started to say, let's make lemonade out of lemons here. We are of the classical liberal mindset. Why not see this as an opportunity to have a thoughtful conversation in our tent and thereby demonstrate what liberal thoughtful discourse can be like. So tell me, Angel, you signed the letter, but you might have some misgivings about it. Talk about where you are with it and what you're going to say on Saturday when you talk about the letter.
Yeah. So we're time traveling a little bit because I think this is going to come out after Saturday, um, which, if I'm not mistaken, Saturday is happening live. So we'll see Saturday before we see this. Um,
That is true. That's a good
yeah,
point.
Time
Right.
traveler, time traveling. So
yeah.
time
So we're
travel on.
we're time traveling a little bit. Yeah. I mean, I Jen sent me the letter, and I just happened to be on a road trip, and I happened to be sitting on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial when I got the email. So I read the letter where the speech happened, and I thought,
Wow.
this is beautiful. And yeah, it is a strongly worded letter. It's not as it's nowhere near as anodyne as the Harper's letter was. Um, and it's kind of funny that I've kind of come full circle here because this whole blitz of me being interviewed on podcasts and having my work read by people started with a piece that I wrote about the Harper's letter,
Mhm.
which at the time I said, I obviously I'm no one anybody would have asked to sign such a thing, but if I were asked, I would have signed it because I believe in what it said. And
Mhm.
then here I am being asked to sign another letter. So I've climbed a few steps up the mountain, I guess.
You
Um,
have.
but yeah, I mean, I read it, and you know, I'm sure I was taken by the moment, by the poetry of it. But I'm sitting at the Lincoln Memorial, and I'm reading the quotes that they have on the wall, and I had just spent the entire day at the Smithsonian African American Museum, which is incredible and super emotional. It's heavy. There's a lot there to process and to deal with, and it's wonderful. I highly recommend people do it. But yeah, so all these ideas and emotions were coming through me, and uh, a kind of a loop of the "I Have a Dream" speech is on one of the screens in the museum. You hear Martin Luther King saying those words, and it's powerful. He was powerful, and the sentiment is powerful. And I had all that in my mind, and I read the letter, and you know, I think I just thought, yeah, I agree with this. I agree with the sentiment. I agree with the intention here. Um, and then yeah, I heard a little bit about the goings on in the background, and I thought, oh well, if John Wood Jr. has some misgivings here, maybe I should rethink this. Like maybe I shouldn't have been so quick to sign this thing. Maybe I wonder what his objections are, and I heard a little bit about what they were. Um, and I totally see where he's coming from, and I agree with him largely. Um, he has more. He's much more educated on Martin Luther King himself. He's much more scholarly on Martin Luther King than I am. Um, I'm by no means an expert or a scholar on Martin Luther King, but that sentiment is still there in the letter, and it was enough for me to say I still agree with this, even though if I were writing the letter, I would have written it differently. I would have written certain parts of it differently, at least.
Hmm.
I would have certainly included more star manning of the other side, which is one of the things that I think John was concerned about. We didn't do enough in the letter, or the writers didn't do enough in the letter to kind of satisfy that sort of urge of, look, we understand that your project has this fundamental goal, and we share this goal,
Mhm.
but we disagree with these specific tenets. We reject these, so it kind of, the letter kind of lists off, um, we reject this and we believe in this. And there's a list of that towards the end of the letter. And I agree with all of those things. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's I would have written this or I would have added that, but it's not an I letter, it's a we letter. So, yeah, it's uh, you know,
Right.
it's
So
not going to be something I would have written myself exactly.
right,
But
right. And I would have, I was one of the authors, but not the primary author, and I probably would have done what you suggested, how you would have
Mhm,
written it as well. But
mhm.
let me for a second channel my best Andrew Gutman, who's our partner here,
Right.
and Andrew's a very bright guy, and maybe I'm channeling it because I worry he's right. Okay,
Wait, let me
but
interrupt you to say Andrew Gutman is the primary author of the Dream Coalition letter. So for our listeners, if they're not familiar, that's
Mm.
who you're channeling now. So go ahead, David. Sorry,
yeah,
just
I'm channeling him, but and partly because I fear he could be right, even though I go back and forth on these myself. You know, this is in part an advocacy project, and those of us, and I count you as in this large movement or coalition, whatever we choose to call it, want to restore liberalism in our society, and we might have different theories on the best way of doing it. So one theory might be, who's our target audience? Well, our target audience are probably people who might largely agree with us, but they're not sure yet. And we've got to devise the kind of nuanced, soft language that will bring them along and get them off the fence and to understand why it's important to support liberalism. People, especially on the, let's say, the center left, who haven't gone completely woke, but have, they're sensitive and they're thoughtful and they want to do the right thing. That's one theory of advocacy. The other theory of advocacy is you really have to build a movement by energizing your core. And you have to first energize your core. And we haven't really done that yet. And even if you overstep in doing so, you have to bring out that power. You have to be willing to use those levers of power. And you can only do it by bringing people out in droves to go out there and protest, to say the things that may be said, sometimes not in the most nuanced way, sometimes not star manning, and so forth. And that, and I think that's where Andrew comes down, and that's a
Mhm.
more powerful way of driving a movement in these stages than thinking that we're going to, gently move everybody off the fence who might agree with us. What do you
Mhm.
think of that dilemma, that advocacy, strategic advocacy dilemma?
Yeah, I get this a lot because it's really the main uh, the main argument that I get, or criticism that I get, of star manning. Right? It's like we can't star man all the time, right? We need to mobilize sometimes, and I don't think that those things are mutually exclusive. I don't think it's impossible to mobilize while star manning. I'm pretty fucking motivated, right? And I'm intent on not vilifying or dehumanizing my opponents. And I'm extremely motivated by the desire to achieve the goal that I have, which is to foster conversation and communication. So you know, I think the difference is in what's easier, and I don't mean this in a kind of I don't mean this as a criticism of Andrew or of the letter, really. It's just that it's easier to mobilize people by pointing to an enemy and saying, these are the ones we need to destroy. It's harder to mobilize people by saying, these are the ideas we need to combat, right? Because now we've moved to an abstraction, and it's harder to mobilize people with abstractions. But it's not impossible. And the thing is that there are consequences to the first way, and you're kind of it's what do you call it? It's a trade-off. So
Trade off.
you're gonna mobilize people, sure. You're gonna get them ramped up and ready, and they're gonna be hitting the streets and marching, but they're going to have an enemy in mind. They're going to be othering. They're going to be making enemies out of potential allies because they're going to be sucked into this very human, sort of in group out group tendency, right? And part of star manning is wanting to offset that and neutralize that because it's a problem because the trade-offs are imbalanced, and they're imbalanced in the negative, right? I think that we end up making a bigger mess by doing it that way. So even though it takes longer to mobilize people through an idea, even though it's more difficult to get people marching and on the streets saying, we believe in liberal values, I don't think it's impossible. I think people care enough. And I think the stakes are high enough if you know how to articulate it, right? Because the stakes are really high. The stakes are we're going to, this entire thing, this entire project is going to collapse because it is founded upon our ability to communicate with each other. And we are not doing that right now.
Mm.
So I think, to coin another thing, I think it should be a call to open arms. I think it should be a kind of, with the fervency of, militancy and boots on the ground sort of thing, but it should be geared towards, we don't want you to be an enemy. I wrote the other day on Twitter, there are two ways to eliminate your enemy: destruction or, persuasion, conversion, right? And it seems like the first way is optimal because you're getting rid of them. But the inevitable consequences of that are myriad. And the major ones are, first of all, you might be destroying someone who isn't actually your enemy by accident because it's a false flag, and you become the thing that you wanted to destroy in the act of destroying it. And the third thing is just, you create more enemies, right? So when you have this vicious approach, and I'm not saying that Andrew does, but this is kind of the extension of this sort of thing, is when you have this vicious approach, you're going to get viciousness back, right? And there's a better way. If you convert your enemies into friends, you're making more friends and you're getting rid of your enemies. And that's more difficult to do. It requires more patience. It requires compassion. It requires time. But in the end, it's worth it. Your soul is intact, right? You didn't just create a factory of enemies, and you've gained allies. So
Well,
I just think that, you know, it, there are a lot of tactical reasons for doing this sort of thing, but the reason that I would have put more star manning into this letter is because, first of all, the thing that I just said, right? Like, we're more likely to kind of welcome people into the fold because we're not shutting the door on them. But the other thing is just it inoculates us against these really petty and, um, kind of ground level criticisms, right? So anybody can dismiss the letter as like, oh, this is another othering. This is another us versus them. This is another, vilifying people who are trying to achieve social justice, vilifying people who care about racism, right? You're calling us monsters. No, that word is not used in the letter, but this is the kind of reaction that will inevitably come up. I've already seen it. The letter has been out for
sure.
not even not even 24 hours. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at with that.
You know what I love though, Angel, is I don't necessarily disagree with you. I didn't see as much of the aggression, perhaps because I'm biased towards the letter. But here's what I love is what David said earlier is we saw the backlash, or we not the backlash is we saw people disagree with it, like John Wood Jr., and we
Yeah.
said, awesome,
Right.
awesome. Let's
Right.
have a like. Yes, we get that. Yes, David and I, along with Andrew, helped. Andrew was primary, but we all helped to put this together. But it was like, let's at least we forced the dialogue, and instead of them running away from the dialogue and going, like tag, in your
Mhm.
face and running away. I think that I'm really happy where this ended up because I mean, I can't wait for our conversation on Saturday. Again, we're time warping because this won't come out till next week, where we're talking with people with different views. Because I do think getting the legacy, Martin Luther King's legacy, right, and how it applies to our current situation and how we can make it apply to our current situation is critical.
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to clarify that, I'm kind of extrapolating from the starting point of, the parts of the letter that I would have worded differently or that I would have put more into, kind of star manning. The letter is nowhere near as hostile as what I was describing, right? I don't think it's. I mean, I wouldn't have signed it if it were, right? So yeah, I just want to be clear. I don't mean to straw man. I don't mean to create a fake version of this letter that I'm now arguing against. But it's just the sentiment of we need to raise our fists, and I understand it, but there are consequences, and we should be
Mhm.
careful. And I think that there's a way to be a kind of warrior of compassion. There's a way to this
Like
is
that.
something else that I've written since we spoke about the star manning thing. Is
Mhm.
I get a lot of straw manning of star manning. Which is, the main thing is I'm very frustrated by this idea that I'm just obsessed with being nice and it's civility porn and that I just want to sing kumbaya with Nazis,
Civility
right?
porn.
And it's, yeah, and that's ridiculous. That's not at all what I'm doing or what I'm advocating for. Fight for what you believe in, argue strongly, but focus on the ideas and don't make monsters of people who hold different ideas. That's the only thing. It's just don't make the assumption right off the bat that your opponent, because you disagree with them, is an asshole or a monster or beneath contempt or incapable of change.
Mhm.
None of those things are true. So
Mhm.
that's really all it is.
Mhm.
But yeah, people have this idea of me like, oh, he just wants to be nice. He wants people to like him. I really don't care if people like me, and I will disagree with you. Look at my Twitter. I disagree with people all the
You
time,
do. You do.
but there's a way to do it that doesn't kind of shut the door to, well, like, because ultimately what I want is, if I'm wrong, I want to find out, and if
Mm.
if you're wrong, I want to help you find out,
Mhm.
because it's good to find out when you're wrong, because now you don't have to deal with that anymore. You're not wrong anymore. You're not, furthering that idea or acting upon it. That's good. So that's really all I care about. I want to be persuaded when I'm wrong, and I want to persuade when others are wrong. I want to do my best to communicate. And there's a way to do that that works better for humans than calling them an asshole, labeling them as a monster, or all these things that we see people do on Twitter. So
Yeah.
that's 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 uh that's the other thing there.
I was just going to say, well, it's always great to talk to the warrior of compassion. By the way,
Yeah.
you have a lot of, I'll call them angelisms, a lot of
Yes.
gems
Yes.
that that I try to write down when I can.
Me too. Civility porn is cracking me up.
Oh, I didn't
Civility.
make that one up. That's not me.
Well, I
Somebody
don't
else.
know. I never heard that before. Civility porn is the
Yeah,
best.
yeah, that's the mischaracterization. But yeah, I didn't come up with that one. I don't know who
Right.
did.
Well, you're
Mhm.
still dropping some awesome gems. And I know this is going to continue on into the future. So until our next conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Until Saturday.
Talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Hold My Drink. Like or subscribe to the show and check out the show notes for links to source material and to our website, where you can find what each of us is reading every week, different news with different views. If you have a topic that you would like us to explore, drop us a line. And join us next week as we say, Hold My Drink, and the conversation gets real.